Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. In this episode, I'll be making a bowl using a maple log and epoxy resin. I'll be putting together everything I've learned up to now. So let's get into it. After cutting the log to length, I marked the centre and drilled an 8mm hole. This is to locate it on the circle cutting jig on the bandsaw. With the wood firmly secured in the jig, I cut the ends off by rotating it through the blade. For the first cut, I just fed it straight in before beginning the circular cut. It seems to cut better this way. And with the last bit cut away, I made sure it would fit in the casting bucket and assembled some waste blocks on top. I'd set my mind on Fantasia Pink for the epoxy resin colour, but before any mixing I had to clean the maple blank. For this I used a brass wire brush to get rid of the loose bits of bark and dirt. A little bit of machine wax helps to stop the epoxy resin getting stuck in the bucket. I used 2 coats, cleaned away with paper towel, then I placed the blank in ready for the resin. And I also was having second thoughts about the colour. Aquamarine blue, anybody? I decided to mix 3 batches of resin. I'm getting my eye on now on how much to use, and I reckon that would be enough. I used my usual 2-to-1 mix of 150 grams of part A to 300 grams of part B, each mixed thoroughly for 2 minutes before adding the colour in, then mixed for a further 2 minutes. I felt the pink on its own was going to be a bit much, so I added rose red alcohol dye to darken the mix before adding the Fantasia Pink, but I still wasn't convinced on the choice of colour. With all 3 batches mixed, I poured them all into the bucket, ready for the vacuum pot, but the colour was really getting to me, so off camera and after 5 minutes in the vacuum pot, I mixed another 300 grams of epoxy resin, this time with the aquamarine blue colouring. I figured that would tone it down a fair bit. I placed the casting in the vacuum pot and took it to the maximum 29 inches and left it for 5 minutes to draw all of the air out of the maple blank, filling all the nooks and crannies with solid resin. The maple was quite porous. Even after removing it from the vacuum, the bubbles kept rising to the top, and the blowtorch was fairly ineffective at removing them. Off camera, I added the extra 300 grams of blue resin and put the whole thing in the pressure pot. I added the usual 50 to 55 psi and left it overnight to cure. It's a few days later and the blank has cured with no cracks or voids visible. The colour has come out nice as well. After removing it from the bucket, I removed the excess from the waste block, marked the centre and drilled the 8mm hole for the woodworm screw. Then I mounted it on the lathe using the tailstock to secure it in place. The lathe spinning at around 900 to 1000 RPM, I set to removing material to get the blank to round, using the Easy Wood Tools full-size finisher, complete with negative rake cutting head. Next I exposed the ends of the maple in the base of the blank. This needed to be done first so I could then set about defining the overall shape. The new carbide cutter made easy work of peeling streams of resin off the blank. To get the full benefit from the maple blank, I decided to make a pedestal bowl. This would expose the most amount of maple with the resin isolated in two areas on the base. This is what I hoped for when I first cut the blank. You can't see from this angle, but the maple blank moved to one side in the casting, and this put the waste block off centre and closer to the edge than I would have preferred. This forced me to keep the sides of the bowl straight, as I didn't think it would leave much to form an overhanging rim, but as you'll see later, it didn't turn out so bad. I alternated between the full-size and mid-size carbide cutter, using the 3/8 bowl gouge to form the cutout above the base. For this bowl I decided to keep it simple. The maple and coloured resin seemed to be contrasting quite well. Chisel came in handy for squaring up the edge of the base and rim, and also blending the curve of the cutout into the straight sides. And with a final bit of fine tuning from a large negative rate scraper and full-size carbide, I moved on to forming the mortise in the base. First, the base needed to be flattened. I actually form a slight dish so the bowl will sit on the very edge. And with that done, I used a thin parting tool to form the outer edge of the mortise. I do measure this. I try to get it around 70mm diameter to suit the jaws on my chuck. I then used a 3/8 bowl gouge to remove the inner material. I'll leave a small piece in the middle for the tailstock support. This is the last bit I remove, so it keeps everything nice and centred. I used the dovetail cutter to tidy up the edge of the mortise, and that was it done. I had uncovered a couple of deep cracks in the resin, so rather than try to hide them with more matching coloured resin or superglue, I thought I would enhance them with black Starbond superglue to make them stand out like veins in marble. I waited a while to let the glue settle into the crack, then used a spray-on accelerator to cure the glue. Then after a couple of minutes I used the mid-size carbide cutter to gently remove the excess. I had to repeat this a couple of times before the cracks were full and flush with the surface. If I had more time I would have used black coloured resin in the vacuum pot. I think that would give much better results, but it would take a day waiting for the resin to cure. Once I was happy that the cracks were fixed, I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit, then went through my usual finishing process, starting with a good clean down with denatured alcohol, then a good application of sanding sealer, denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. After this I used Yorkshire Grit abrasive paste, one coat, cleaned away, ready for the next stage. Yorkshire Grit microfine abrasive paste, 2 coats, applied liberally, cleaned off so there is no more residue on the paper towel. And finally, the two Novus products, starting with the fine abrasive paste. Then to finish, Novus Plastic Clean and Shine. These last two Novus products are just for the acrylic. I'm not unhappy with the finish I'm getting, but in my future epoxy resin projects, I will be trying out a different process with new finishing products and an additional finish for the wood in this type of project. The first one will hopefully be the project after next. After finishing the outside, I turned the bowl round and started hollowing out the centre. First off, I used a 3/8 bowl gouge, but with the tailstock in place it's difficult to get the correct angle, so I soon replaced it with the Easy Wood Tools full-size finisher. Much easier, and I don't have to keep visiting the sharpening wheel. I keep the tailstock in place for the added security it gives until I remove a lot of the weight. Once I get to the bottom of the bowl, I feel better about taking it away. This gives me clear access to finish the inside. With this bowl, I wanted to get the inside down into the maple, exposing as much of it as I could, just leaving the sides to show off the resin. I also wanted the sides to be thin enough so light would easily pass through it. On removing resin from the sides. The waste block was so far off centre I had to keep going to get rid of it all, but with it all gone I could concentrate on the rest, bringing the sides down to the required thickness and blending the rim to flare out from the inside. With that done, it was time to take out the centre support. For this I used a 3/8 bowl gouge, as it was mainly just wood. With that gone, I could start to flatten the bottom using a large negative rate scraper, with a bit of help from the full-size carbide cutter. Couple more passes to blend and fair it all together, and it was time to do a bit of sanding. The cracks I dealt with on the outside were now showing on the inside, so I fixed them the same way with black Star Bond super glue. After the super glue had cured, I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit. Then I cleaned the inside with more denatured alcohol, applied sanding sealer, and denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Yorkshire grit was next, cleaned away with paper towel. Then Yorkshire grit microfine abrasive paste, 2 coats, cleaned away with more paper towel. Novus fine abrasive paste, just a single application. Again, this is only for the finish on the acrylic. Then last but not least, Novus Plastic Clean and Shine, also just on the acrylic. And that's another project finished, and I'm very happy with it. The colour turned out much better for the last minute edition of the Aquamarine blue. And the repaired cracks? Well, for me, they had a bit of character. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll be doing something a bit different next time, so if I could ask you to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.